gold trails and ghost towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barley.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley with you again today. And of the hundreds of rivers in British Columbia, we're going to focus today on a part of one of them. And it's one of, you would call it maybe your favorite river.
It is my favorite river. And I have to explain that. I like the Skeena, I like the Nass, I like the Stikine, I like the Similkameen, the Columbia in parts, certainly, the Fraser in much of its length. But of all those rivers, if I had to choose one to spend a lifetime on, it would be the main Thompson, no doubt about it. That stretch of river running from Kamloops, right through Kamloops Lake, right down to Lytton. And it's steeped in history. It's dry belt country, sagebrush, rattlesnakes. The Caribou Road ran through that. Yep. The railroads ran through it after. It's a beautiful river. And I like the towns that are the smaller towns outside of Kamloops. It was quite large. So you start at Lytton, and then you go up through Spence's Bridge, which was Old Cook's Ferry. And then you go up to Ashcroft, and then you go right through to Whalhachin, which we've never touched on, over to Savannah, which was going to be the metropolis of the main line, and finally to Kamloops. So this is the area we'll be talking about today. And it's pretty close to my background, my heart. I've always liked it. I liked it when I was 10 years old. I still like it at 63.
All right, we're going to take a look at the main Thompson from Lytton to Kamloops, that area in there, as Gold Trails and Ghost Towns continues. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley, and we're talking about the main Thompson, that area of the Thompson River from Kamloops down to Lytton. Yep. I guess we're going to start in the west at Lytton.
Yeah, let's start on the western anchor. I mean, this is an old Indian village. It then became a gold rush town and finally a railroad town. It's not a huge town. It's on a barren flat up there, and this is a picture of it about over 100 years ago.
It's thriving. 100 years ago, it's thriving.
Yeah, well, it's a transportation hub, too.
Yep.
But it isn't the main transportation hub, but this is where the Thompson dumps into the Fraser.
Look at all these guys gathered around this porch, and what a fine group of people, all of them posing very stiffly, except the dog, who's
the dog has to scratch himself.
And who are these characters?
Well, these are some of the individuals who frequent the Hautier Hotel in Lytton, and one of several hotels, the Hautier and the Globe and so on. And typical scene of the 1880s, and they're posing very, very still with the exception of their little mascot over there.
And although they're all probably cowboys or, mining people of some kind, I don't often think of BC as being the Wild West, but this little souvenir would indicate that they did carry firearms with them occasionally.
Yeah, most of the miners who went up the Fraser in the late 1850s, early 1860s, Mike, they were well armed. First of all, there's Indian trouble on the Thompson and parts of the Fraser, so they went well armed, and this was lost on the river. A skin diver brought it in to me about 14 years ago, I guess, or 15 years ago, and said, I found this right where the Thompson dumps into the Fraser.
I guess when you lost this, you lost something else as well, eh?
Oh, yeah.
This would not just be something that would fall aimlessly out of your pocket.
Definitely not. This individual was in trouble. I would think he probably was consigned to the depths of the Thompson and never
interesting
simply
artifact,
lost.
though,
Yeah.
And a neat gun.
It's a great artifact.
This photograph here is kind of interesting, too. As you're driving into or bringing the stagecoach into Lytton, the lady on the side of the road there has a wash tub and washboard.
Yeah, it's a great picture, I think. That's life in the 1880s in Lytton.
Look at
two Indian cowboys down the road, and the Indian woman here, and she's curious about the photographer, and he's just as curious about her.
Yeah, look at the sagebrush everywhere.
Oh, yeah,
it's a hot town. Anybody who's ever been in Lytton in the summer, well, it's almost always the hottest temperature in all of Canada.
Yeah, that and the South Okanagon.
Yeah, that's right. Looking at this shot, I love this shot, and look at the size of that freight wagon. That looks like a modern semi-trailer with a pup on behind.
It does, Mike, and that's very unusual. I would think they're carrying some perishable goods because they have the cover over the top, and this is the big bluff on the Thompson. And it's one of the classic shots of British Columbia. That's why we used it years ago, but it's a great shot.
The Thompson Indians, of course, called this area home. Where better to set up your community than on a river that brings you all the food you could use and look at the regalia. And
Yeah.
I've never seen a teepee quite like that before.
No, they adopted some of the plains trays, and you can see that in the dress of the Thompsons here. And they were very, very independent and quite fierce. They made it very tough for the miners in one of the wars along the Fraser.
Well, I can imagine they felt a little
Yeah, they held sway on the Thompson River for hundreds of years. So.
Of course, you could keep talking about the Caribou Road, and in this shot, you see a roadhouse way down the valley.
Yeah.
This place, if you were down by the river, you at least had something to drink. If you were up on the hill,
right.
It was hot as Hades.
Baking hot. I mean, even today in that Thompson River country, it is brutal on certain days. You have to be close to the river. And this is a very famous shot because this is the Nikoman. This is where an Indian, unnamed, found gold, probably 1857. Some say it was Tronquil. I don't think so. I think it was the Nikoman, and there's the Nikoman flowing down through a waterfall, actually, right into the Thompson itself.
Interesting shot. And there's a more placid Thompson River shot. But again, you see the side hills are barren, and there you go.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
This shot, we're beginning to move away from Lytton now. This is to Spence's Bridge.
Spence's Bridge, originally Cook's Ferry, and then they put the bridge across. They named it Spence's Bridge. And good shot of Spence's Bridge. And it was a key because the bridge across it actually crossed over the Thompson and went on up the Caribou Road.
Spence was the guy who built the bridge, why they call it Spence's Bridge.
Yeah.
Did he have any other sort of history beyond that? Or?
Yeah, I can't remember a lot about Spence. He wasn't that well known. I think he may have had some military background, Mike, if I remember correctly.
This photograph shows Spence's Bridge before the railway goes through, so that's pivotal. Talking what, was 85 when the railway went through?
84, 85 in that section. I think it was 84 it went through in that section. And before the big avalanche came down, the landslide and buried the Indian village. So that's kind of an interesting shot, too.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
So there again, you get the feel for that particular country. Spence's Bridge. Ashcroft. You are a fan of Ashcroft.
Always
we did
have
a whole
been.
show on it.
Yeah, always have been. I don't know why. I feel comfortable. When I drive down into Ashcroft, I still feel comfortable. And when I look at it, when I look at the pictures of Ashcroft, we've touched on it before, but here's some new pictures that we probably have never used. And this is Ashcroft, about 1910, after the railroad's there, Mike. And again, typical of that barren country, that hot belt down in the bottom of the Thompson River.
And would Ashcroft have been established simply because of the railroad, or did it come up as a sort of a cattleman's town?
No, it's a good question. Ashcroft was there, ideally situated, strategically located, because from Ashcroft, all trails led north. They led north through Cache Creek and then Clinton and up into Williams Lake and up into Barkerville and Lightning Creek and Quesnel Forks, you name it. And that's where the freight teams left. They left, and the stagecoaches left from Ashcroft.
Here's a BC Express, and look at this is a 6-horse hitch, and lots of people piled on board the ever-popular dog, and they're heading off to somewhere.
That's right. That's one of the greatest stage lines of the Old West. Traveled actually longer runs than Wells Fargo.
And this hitch looks like about a 20-mule team borax, only these aren't mules. These look like Clydesdales. These are big draft horses.
Now, interesting. This is a very interesting picture. Just came across it a few months ago. And the guy on the extreme right-hand side of that picture is a guy called Smitty. He's got a sombrero on.
Yeah.
And Smitty, when he got paid, he didn't mind it, but he would rather fight. When he got fat, he didn't mind it, but he would rather fight. And he was known up and down the Caribou Road. Don't even look sideways at Smitty, because he'd fight you to a dead stop. This guy was brutal, and we have
was just a sort of a cultural thing for him.
Oh yeah, it was. I don't know why. I mean, nobody can explain it, but well known up and down the Caribou Road. And of course, we have Bailey and Company was an extremely important freighting company. They went all over the place.
I've got a couple of letters here, as a matter of fact. This is Harvey, Bailey and Company. Every time you get a letter, it's a wonderful thing because they are so fragile.
Oh, yes.
This has also all the Chinese characters.
Yeah.
And Mister, can you tell me that? What is that?
That's Fang Ki.
Fang Ki.
Yeah.
And
he was the banker, the Chinese banker in Quesnel Forks.
Okay, and so Mr. Harvey Bailey and Company are sending him a bill, undoubtedly.
Indeed.
Indeed. And Mr. Fang Ki was going to pay it.
He does pay it.
Excellent thinking.
Yes, I've got all sorts of letters from him.
Isn't that wonderful? And we've got all sorts of those kinds of letters for Bailey and Company. Yeah. Obviously, he was a regular user of their services, and great to have those along. Yeah. The Queen is upside down on this stamp over here.
Well, Fang Ki didn't know and didn't care, probably.
Probably didn't care. All right.
Yeah.
Excellent. People in I love this shot. Now, first of all,
I do
you've
too.
already talked about the Thompson Indian people,
Yeah.
and here they are down by the river, I presume.
Yeah, I would think it's salmon season, but I'm guessing at that.
And the kids, and
Yeah.
would that be Dad or Grandpa? Would that be in there?
I think that's their father. I'm quite sure that's their father. And that's just after the turn of the century. And it's a great shot of,
They just look
of
puzzled.
life in the Thompson in that era.
They look puzzled about the photographer,
Yeah,
don't they?
and he's not too friendly.
Yeah.
That's reasonable.
And then you get this shot. It looks like a couple of little Lord Fauntleroys
Oh, doesn't it ever?
out on the rocker
Sure.
box.
That's right. Somebody had used a rocker box, and their dad says, go down the rocker box and try to pan some gold. So they go down there. They think they're going to get gold. Well, they probably don't know how to do it, first
Yeah.
of all. And the guy on the left, or the right, I think, is one of the Burr family. The Burrs, that's Raymond Burr, used to be
His
actor in
ancestor.
Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, his family. And he came from New Westminster. And he's down there. This is one of the Burrs right there.
Well, now, I mean, they're all dressed up like
Oh,
this
sure
is
they are.
Sunday church-going clothes, and
Yeah.
there must be a great story behind this.
Yeah,
A novel could probably handle that story right
Probably,
there.
but I haven't got the information, unfortunately.
Oh, darn it. Maybe somebody out there does.
Yeah, they may have.
Mining's important in this area,
Sure
and
it is.
we haven't mentioned the word mine yet, but here's a mine.
Yeah.
And what would this is the Maggie mine?
Yeah, the Maggie. I think the Maggie is mostly copper, maybe a little bit of gold. Usually copper and gold mixed slightly in that area. So the Maggie mine was a significant mine. And but there were lots of mines beyond, just out of Ashcroft. So Ashcroft had, you know, all sorts of ways to make a living. And lots of people there did in the mining field.
This is one of the great news photographs, I guess, of that era,
Yeah.
because Ashcroft suffered the same fate as so many other pioneer
Sure.
towns.
Sure, and right in the hot belt. So there's Ashcroft burning, and that's about 1916, and I think I remember that date correctly. And
That is an inferno.
it is. People didn't even bother to fight it.
They just
really
ran.
Did not bother to fight it.
And the next morning, it looked just like that.
The next morning they started fighting it, and
Oh.
that's what happened. Devastation in the business section, and the fires have taken their tolls in Old Ashcroft, unfortunately.
But it's still there, you know? I
It's
mean,
great.
you can go right to where that
Yeah.
first photograph was taken and look down and say,
Yeah.
I got the idea.
And a great museum too.
Now, there's one other small town that you didn't include,
Yeah.
Harper's Mill. That sounds like a sort of an East town, an Eastern American place or something.
No, it isn't actually. It's a mill about 17 miles upriver from Ashcroft. Classic shot again, showing the typical scenery all along there. And that scenery doesn't change right from there to Kamloops. So it amazes me. Every shot you look at a century and a half ago, it's exactly the same, Mike.
Now, every one of the communities we talked about so far had historical origins, they had commercial origins,
Yeah.
but we're going to take a break. We're going to come back and tell you about a place that just blossomed and died. And we'll do that right after this break as Gold Trails continues. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley, and there's a couple other towns on this Thompson River country that we're going to talk about, Savannah and Kamloops. But my recollection of the next town, Walhachin, my parents used to take us when we were kids on summer car trips.
Sure.
The old Plymouth, I think, had boiled over twice going up the Thompson River, and one of these rest breaks with the car steaming, Dad points up the hill and says, see those flumes up there? That was to carry water to a dream that turned into a disaster.
Yeah.
Whalhachin. And in my little 10-year-old mind, I remembered this,
Oh, yeah.
and a lot of other people were fascinated by it too. The story Whalhachin, Catastrophe or Camelot, is one of your favorite books.
Yeah, no doubt. Joan Weir has done a marvelous job, I think, of looking at Whalhachin. And Whalhachin has kind of a storied atmosphere. There's no doubt about it, Mike. It never amounted to a great deal. The height of the population was around 200. It was founded in 1907 on a dream. The Marquis of Anglesey. He decided
The
that he...
Marquis of Anglesey's the
Yes.
guy. Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
he very, very wealthy man. English, of course. Decided to have an orchard paradise like they were going to have in the Okanagon and did have in the Okanagon. So they went to Whalhachin. The land looked good. They bought 5,000 acres. And then they shipped in a lot of prospective individuals from England, most of them blue bloods, Mike. There were hyphenated names all the way through that population.
Yeah.
There were military commissions. There were people related to King George V. Nelson,
was it just so depressing in
Cecil
England?
Rhodes.
Yeah?
Some of them were on the run because they were youngest sons. And
Oh,
there was nothing
remittance
really,
men, yeah.
That's right. A few remittance men, a number of single women, who surprisingly, And they brought with them all that background from England.
All that culture.
Of course, and they had to have a hotel. So they built a hotel. Now, building a hotel, really, before the town got off the mark, was amazing. And the hotel, surprisingly, was successful. Here's a picture of the hotel in its formative stages. Afterwards, there were gardens and everything else around it. And the hotel was far different than the hotel all the way up the line. The hotels in Kamloops and Cache Creek were pretty rough, but certainly not in Whalhachin. In Walhachin, when you went to dinner in Whalhachin, you wore formal attire, evening dress.
Or not allowed in, I bet.
You were not allowed in, indeed. and so they carried this little bit of England into this forlorn area of the South Thompson, where you had to get across to the other side at first by a ferry, eventually put a bridge across in 1912. And what else did they bring with them? All the trappings of England. They brought a tennis court. They put in a tennis court, put it right into the Marquis of Anglesea's estate. And here's the picture of the tennis court. They want to play tennis. They played in England. They're going to play at Whalhachin.
Darn right.
You bet. And the cricket, they were excellent cricketers. So they had a cricket pitch in Whalhachin. Golf, certainly. They had a golf course in Whalhachin. And what else did they have? A whole bunch of other things. They had a fox hunt. Now, they couldn't find any foxes.
I guess not.
So one of the stories kind of interesting. And Joan brings it up in the book. One of the local ranchers was asked to provide a coyote. Well, he raised a coyote from a pup. And you have to watch coyotes, because if their eyes are open, they never really trust you, not like a wolf. But anyway, he'd raised them from a pup. And he said, okay, and they asked him to let the coyote go. So they got all out in the fox hunt, and they were riding to the hounds and all ready to go. And they let this coyote out. He heads for the sagebrush. He's gone like a flash ahead of the hounds. And the rancher he thinks about it, and he's sitting there, and he's moping about it. He said, God, he said, I like that coyote. I really, and he hears the baying of the hounds and the yelping and the horses pounding off in the distance. And he turns around and goes, about a half an hour later, and you can still hear the baying, and you just barely hear the hounds. They're gone. Turns around, there's the coyote sitting on the steps waiting for his meal. He'd given him the ditch, of course.
So the Thompson Valley coyote was slightly superior to the hounds of the day.
Of course
What a great thing. And, you know, if it weren't for the English people coming out here, they probably brought with them carol festivals, singing, concerts, music. I mean, it must have been sort of the cultural center of the area.
Yes, they didn't have much time for the colonials, which were the rest of the people in the area.
Ragtag bunch of...
So the majority of the people were indeed aristocrats, and they looked down on the colonials, and the colonials in turn didn't like them too much. But there were some people they accepted. One of the teamsters was an interesting guy called Al Foco, and he'd been a teamster on the Caribou Road. And
it doesn't sound like the kind of person that would naturally mix with the gentry.
They admired his bravery. He was brave as a lion. And one couple of stories about him, I'll tell you. One is they had to get across the river to a message on the other side, and the ferryman, it was obviously 1908, 1909, would not go. The river was in flood, and the Thompson in flood is quite impressive. And he said, no way. So Foco gets a telegraph pole, jumps on the telegraph pole, and paddles across the river in flood. People couldn't believe it. They thought he was consigned to certain death. Another time, one of the workers had died at Whalhachin, and they thought, okay, we have to have an autopsy. We'll have to go to the provincial police in Ashcroft. So Folklore, with another guy, they don't know how to drive. They borrow a car, an old Ford, and they start up the road. It's a dirty day. And they come to a hill that is about a 24 or 25% grade down on the other side, and it's muddy, extremely muddy. They know they're going to slip off the road and probably go into the Thompson River. So Folco thinks about this for a minute, and he says, I know how to fix that. He ties himself to the back of this Ford, and he has heavy boots on. And as it goes down the hill, whenever they have to go a little slower, he digs his shoes into the earth.
He's a human brake.
He's a human brake, a human anchor, and he's also a rudder. And they made it to the bottom. So this guy was really quite unusual, and they accepted the Folklos, both he and his wife, into the inner sanctum of that peculiar society.
Well, the whole combination is peculiar.
Sure.
A, that he would want to be with this strange crowd, and B, that they would have him.
Well, I think it was mutual admiration society. He kind of found them interesting, and they found him extremely interesting. But, you know, the dream came to an end. The 5,000 acres they had, only 3% of that was capable of raising crops, and that was only vegetables. None of them none of it was capable of raising orchards. And here's a photograph of some of the planting they had done in Walhachin. And you know, it was hopeless.
I mean, it may be cactus, but not
that's
orchards.
Right. That's right, precisely. And what happened, I guess they were saved, or something happened, because in 1914 war broke out, and most of the able-bodied men from Walhachin went directly to England and joined the war effort.
Now,
in fact, it had the highest rate of enlistment of any place in Canada by far. So this is a shot of the British Columbia Horse, and they were training at Walhachin just prior to the war. A lot of the men went off. Many of them never came back, and some of the families simply pulled up roots, Mike, and they left and never returned to Walhachin, and they left everything behind. When there was an auction some years later, they found that there were sterling silver tea services that sold for just a couple of dollars, full services, settings of 12. They had oil paintings written, at least, you know, drawn by some of the masters and painted by some of the masters. They had the best of silverware and everything, flatware, you name it, and it went for a song. And so by 1914, that's essentially the finish of Walhachin.
And I remember, of course, in the 50s going by and seeing those flumes along the hillside, which are sort of the last vestiges of that. You know, you still can see one occasionally. There's an old outcropping there. Yeah, you can see a few indelible marks that still that are a result of that ill-fated campaign. And now it's, I mean, it's exactly the way it was before they attempted it at this stage of the game. Precisely. Savannah, of course, is a town that is in that country and much more well-suited to survival, being down on the water. They thought they were going to compete with Kamloops. And the first pictures in early 1880 shows you a pan shot of Savannah. And it looks like it's getting there. Sure. People said, yeah. Guys like Janes and some of these old merchants said, yes, sir, Savannah is going to outdo Kamloops. And, of course, the owner of the Lakeview Hotel in Savannah was positive that he would be one of the first stops on the main line of the CPR. It didn't work out that way, Mike. Because Kamloops was the town. Of course. Kamloops was the natural place. And here's a few shots of Kamloops as it was before the railroad came in? Yeah, just before the railroad and just after the railroad as well. Well, you know, it's just that story of Walhachin, that the hopes and dreams of a society completely unsuited to be there decided to set up roots on the banks of this river in the heat of the desert, and they for a while they were green as grass, Mike, and but there was never any grass in Walhachin. I guess that's the truth. Thank you very much, Bill. You're welcome. Bill Barlee taking us on, as he usually does, fascinating, meandering tour on this occasion of the main Thompson, the river from Lytton to Kamloops, and it's his favorite. You might even see him there one day if you happen to stop by the main Thompson River. We'll see you next time on Gold Trails and Ghost Towns.